Okay, welcome back to The Real Story with Jeanne Ives. I'm going to go through about 6 different items with you. We're going to start out talking about the transgender issue. The issue, honestly, to me, if this is a fundamental truth issue. And my reveille, which will be recorded later today, is all about that. We're going to talk about the transgender issue. We're going to talk about the comment closing arguments. I'm going to talk about that special deal for risky borrowers, which is absolutely insanity. We're going to talk about some Springfield bills that are complete nonsense. We're going to talk also about $1 billion the state of Illinois spent to give non-citizens health care. $1 billion. And back in 2020, when Dalia Ramirez, who has now been elevated to Congress, back then, guess what? She said the program would cost $2 million. It's $1 billion of your tax money going to non-citizens for health care. We're going to talk a lot about that. And then I've got a clip that I pulled from Dan and Amy's show this morning on fentanyl. Why is this important? Well, because Bob Berlin is bragging about a huge fentanyl bust that he just did, and yet Deb Conroy sits as the head of DuPage County. And what did she do? Oh, she went to decriminalize fentanyl as a state legislator. So we are schizophrenic on the fentanyl issue when it comes to legislative action. Let's get started again, though. And this is something that my coworker, my friend Babette Holder found when she was shifting through some TikTok videos. And this is just a fantastic site. It's called Egard Watches. And it goes right with what I talked about in my reveille when it comes to the transgender agenda. So we're going to start out with a clip from their video at Egard Watches. Go ahead and take a listen.
When I was a little girl, I had this dream that seemed so impossible. I was going to be the fastest runner in the world. I got this little nugget of an idea from my dad. He used to watch me run and say, "Ain't no woman alive that can beat you." And I believed him. He made me feel invincible. It wasn't easy. I trained hard, harder than anyone else I know. But I was made for this. I was an unstoppable force, a life dedicated to perfection. But even perfection wouldn't be enough.
Why is that so important to play right now? Well, because last week on April 20th, every single Democrat in Congress voted against protecting Title IX and women's right to compete fairly in athletics. Every single Democrat. Every single one of them. They don't care about people that you just saw in that commercial. They don't care about women. They are the true misogynists. They have a war on women, and it's coming from the Democrat Party. And it's a fundamental truth. You cannot change your sex. Men cannot become women. Women cannot become men. And I will say that until my dying days. Until this country wakes up from really what should be called the big lie. This is the big lie. This transgender movement is the big lie. It's destroying lives. And there is little doubt in most people's minds that the Covenant Christian School attack, the mass killing that happened last month, is a result of a woman disturbed by her transgenderism. There's no doubt. So we need to release the manifesto, by the way. You down in Nashville, you Nashville police, you need to release that manifesto. We need to know what it says. But most people believe that there is an element of her disturbed mind, thinking that she is something that she is not, that played out in this entire killing. And so, I mean, this is where we're at. So thankfully, thank these people, Egard, for standing up for women in women's sports. But don't thank your Democrats. That would be Jonathan Jackson, Robin Kelly, Dalia Ramirez. Dalia Ramirez, who represents a largely Hispanic district, who is largely Christian, who is largely conservative when it comes to social matters. Do those people know who they voted for? We're going to get back to Dalia Ramirez when we talk about her other spending, her other problem, and that is excessive spending. How about Chuy Garcia, Mike Quigley, Sean Casten? Sean Casten has a daughter. Does he care about women's sports? Danny Davis, Raja, Jan Schakowsky, Brad Snyder, Bill Foster, Nikki Budzinski, Lauren Underwood, Eric Sorensen. Oh, the new rep. Maybe he represents sort of socially conservative parts of the western part of our state. Guess not. Every single one of them voted against protecting women's sports. Anyway, I encourage you to go and look at that website, the Egard Watch's website, because they have a lot of other really compelling videos that they have put together on this topic and more. Okay, next up, let's talk about that ComEd closing arguments. All right, I'm reading again from the Chicago Tribune. We are at the closing argument stage. This is about the 4 people that were part of the bribery scheme, or allegedly part of the bribery scheme with Mike Madigan to shake down ComEd for campaign contributions. And the question is whether or not these people played along in it. Now, the people are John Hooker, Jay Doherty, Ann Parmajori, and, of course, Michael McLean. And Michael McLean has a separate additional indictment that is going to come into a trial starting next year, along with Mike Madigan. And so I'm reading from the Chicago Tribune here, and this is part of what they say in this article that was put out yesterday about the closing arguments. Quote, there isn't an envelope in the world big enough to fit all the money that they made ComEd pay out, end quote, Assistant U.S. Attorney Diane MacArthur said in her closing argument to the jury. But defense attorneys scoffed at that notion, saying that their clients were not only innocent, but that they were collateral damage in the government's years-long quest to bring down Madigan, the Democratic leader at the apex of Illinois politics who was long considered to be untouchable. So the defense is making the argument that the real target of all of this prosecutorial action was Mike Madigan. And no doubt that he is really the target. He's the big fish, the longest serving speaker in the entire United States, the man who wielded all the power. I've talked about that before on other podcasts. There's no doubt that he is a target. And so the question here is, and what they're saying here, I'm going to read again, toward the end of his nearly 2-hour presentation, Patrick Cotter, who represents one of the speaker's closest confidants, Michael McLean, told the jury that the entire case was a conclusion in search of evidence. Quote, they already had their target. They already knew who was guilty. It was Mike Madigan, Cotter said, adding that once prosecutors assumed the speaker was guilty, quote, then everyone near him began to look guilty, end quote. So Cotter's explanation is that it's really only Mike Madigan that's guilty. Well, how is that even possible? Think back. I mean, ComEd paid a $2 million payment and said that they will fully comply with anything needed in the prosecution of Mike Madigan, or they will have to forfeit, or they're going to end up being, $200 million payment. Otherwise, they're going to have to go ahead and be put on trial themselves for further collusion with the speaker, further bribery allegations. They paid this huge, massive fine. Were they not guilty? Is this just one of those, it's a nuisance trial, and so it's a nuisance lawsuit, and we're not going to play with it. We'll just pay them off? No. The truth is, and as Joe Cahill wrote in the Crane's Chicago Business, the truth is that this was this was a pittance for ComEd to pay, considering they got over $4 billion in additional funding over the course of about a decade from actions that Madigan did that were favorable to them on the legislative floor. But they are asking the wrong question. They are basically asserting, did Mike Madigan bribe these 4 people? That's not the question for the jury. The question is whether or not these 4 people did things because they thought that they could bribe Mike Madigan? That's the question. Did these 4 people hire people that they knew were not doing jobs, move money around to hide payments to people who were not performing ComEd work and calling them lobbyists when they were literally doing nothing? Did they do that to curry favor with Mike Madigan through his accomplice, Michael McLean? Did they do that attempting to bribe Mike Madigan? I mean, in 2016, Mike Madigan didn't even vote for the ComEd bill. Oh, well, I didn't even vote for their bill, says Mike Madigan. So the point is not what Mike Madigan thought he could do to bribe these people. The point is that what did these people do to think that they could bribe Mike Madigan? There is no doubt in my mind that all of these players thought that if they curried favor with Mike Madigan, they would get their way in Springfield. And guess what? They got their way in Springfield. The bills that they wanted passed with Mike Madigan's vote or without his vote. There's no doubt in my mind that these guys are guilty. We'll see what the jury says. Okay, next topic. A special deal for risky borrowers. I mean, I wrote about it before. I've talked about it before, and that is the student loan bailout. Well, now you've got a new version of the student loan bailout, but this time for risky borrowers. It's unbelievable. The Fox Business had a really good article. They talking about this. Real estate expert shreds the Biden rule punishing home buyers with good credit. He says it's madness. Here's what's happening. A Biden administration rule. This is a rule, by the way. It's not a legislative bill that passed both houses of Congress and got signed by Biden. No, this is a rule made by Biden. This rule forces good credit home buyers to subsidize the loans to higher risk borrowers, and it's set to go in effect May 1st. The changes, which will begin in May, have many experts worried about the impacts on both buyers and the economy. Real estate expert and Madison Ventures managing director Mitch Rochelle unpacked the madness on Varney and Company on Thursday. It's bizarro world, he said. That fee that's charged, that PMI, which is a personal mortgage insurance, that fee that the FHA charges is intended to punish those with lower credit scores and riskier loans to basically level the playing field from a risk perspective. Well, what are we doing? We're doing the opposite. On Mornings with Maria earlier, Strategic Wealth Partners CEO Mark Tepper also slammed the measure, arguing that it is socialism for homeowners. Oh, they talk about exactly what I talked about. We mentioned the student loan issue. Cab drivers who never went to college are subsidizing that student loan debt. And in this situation, this Biden administration, more and more often, they are making decisions to reward bad decisions, the financial expert said. Experts believe that borrowers with a credit score of about 680 would pay around $40 more per month on a $400,000 mortgage under the rules from the Federal Housing Finance Agency that go into effect May 1st. Costs that will help subsidize people with lower credit ratings also looking for a mortgage, according to Washington Times Tuesday. If you have a high credit score and 680 is a good credit score, and you have to pay more. And we're talking about real money. This could be $100 a month more depending on the size of your loan. So it makes no sense. I mean, it's just insanity. Wall Street Journal said the same thing on this topic. They said income redistribution is an abiding value of the Biden administration. And now it wants to spread that to mortgage lending. A new rule will raise mortgage fees for borrowers with good credit and subsidize higher risk. I mean, this is insanity. It's socialization of risk, they say. I mean, how can they do this? We're supposed to have a level playing field when it comes to all of this. And the worst thing about this is they will be subsidizing loans for the same set of people that are not really good risks for lending or associations. They don't have stable income. They have too much debt. They can't actually maybe afford the payments over time if any one little thing happened, like they lose a job, they have a health emergency or anything else. They have nothing else built up in their history to prove that they're a good risk. And yet that's exactly what happened in 2008. We gave out risky home loans to people, and what they do? They tanked the economy. We went into recession. We spent $800 billion, which seems small now compared to the COVID buyouts. And by the way, the SVB bank buyouts. seems kind of small peanuts, but we basically, Bear Stearns went under. Then we had this banking crisis, and we put $800 billion into rescuing people, and then people were in the doldrums. College kids couldn't get jobs, went into recession. Why? Because we had risky borrowers out there, and everything defaulted, and one thing fell after another. This is the same thing. These people are insane. Okay, topic number 3, Springfield nonsense bills. Well, you can go to the ilga.gov website. You can watch committee hearings starting at 2 o'clock today and again at 4 o'clock today. If you go to the House or the Senate side, you can click on their audio or video link and you can listen to this stuff themselves. There's a couple bills, one that's really problematic, and that is SB 1909. That is the bill that would literally, over time, shut down pro-life pregnancy centers. You see, it's not enough for Tara Costa Howard to just say that she's a pro-abort. It's not enough for all the Democrats down in Springfield to essentially say, you know what, I believe in abortion up to the moment of birth, taxpayer funded. Yeah, in fact, I'm okay if we pay women to come across state lines to get their abortion here. We're okay with Planned Parenthood, their clinics being completely uninspected. We're okay if, we signed a bill saying that if somebody dies in an abortion, you don't have to call the coroner. They are not only are they the most radical pro-abortions nearly in the country, now they want to shut down pro-life pregnancy centers. And Tara Costa Howard, this mild-mannered woman, apparently from Glen Ellen, which she's not, by the way, is the chief sponsor of it in the House, SB 1909. I think she pretends to be Catholic and goes to church too, by the way. But she wants to shut down pro-life pregnancy centers. That's what she wants to do, and that bill is terrible. You can actually file a witness slip opposing to that. We sent out an email earlier to do that, or you can go to the Illinois Right to Life Action website, Illinois Right to Life Action website. You can read more about that bill and everything else. Another thing that I want to highlight is there's a couple bills floating around because back just a couple months ago, they passed legislation that took away counties' ability to set siting requirements for wind or solar farms going in. And instead they said, well, the state gets to set those new requirements. Well, there's another bill up now that's in committee today, and it's SB 1127. And that actually waves off a requirement that 2 months ago they just said that they had to have at the state level. It's a bill run by a Republican, and it essentially says that the enterprise zone between I-88 and I-39, that zone that's there will be saved from having wind and solar farms on it because they want to keep it for industrial production. But you see, it wasn't really moving in that way. It wasn't getting used for industrial production yet. Nobody had come in. Why? Because Illinois sucks when it comes to starting a company here. So the land was just sitting there, and a solar farm wanted to come in. Well, this bill will disallow a solar farm from taking up residency inside this enterprise zone. Now, the funny thing about it is that this bill should apply to every enterprise zone in the state of Illinois, but instead it only applies to this as well. There's another interesting thing because there's another bill called SB 1701. It's all about soil health, and it's a Democrat bill. It's calling for the protection of our soil. Okay, all right. You're calling for the protection of our soil. At the same time, you want to put solar panels on fertile farm ground. These guys are schizophrenic when it comes to energy and environment and protection. Anyway, want to highlight those two bills. Now, this last one is a doozy. It's just absolutely a doozy. Okay, this came out yesterday. This is an article by Capital News, Illinois. Non-citizen health care costs $1 billion and is putting a strain on the Illinois budget. $1 billion. So reading from the article, the state estimates an expansion of state-sponsored health care to individuals who are ineligible for Medicaid based on their citizenship status is expected to cost $999 million in the upcoming fiscal year, far outpacing the original price tag cited when the measures became law. So in 2020, the article goes on, Illinois made non-citizens aged 65 and older eligible for Medicaid-type coverage, becoming the first state to do so. Oh, it wasn't New York. It wasn't California. It wasn't Rhode Island or Delaware. No, Illinois. Here's the problem. Your Democrats sitting here in the state of Illinois are so radical that some of the policies that they're proposing, just like the Safety Act was the first in the nation, are becoming first in the nation bills for everything. And so this is one of those. We gave Medicaid type coverage to non-citizens. These are, you can call them what they are. They're illegal immigrants. All right. The cost is borne because this is because the federal government won't cover the 50-50 share. The entire cost of this program is borne by Illinois taxpayers. Now, moving on. Okay, the expansion was inserted, and this is by the way a dangerous part of the budget of the spring session, because the last 4 weeks of spring session are coming right now. They started today, and this is when all the crap gets weaved into a different bill. This is when the budget gets bogged down with all sorts of other stuff that they want to hide. And that's exactly what happened with this bill. The expansion was inserted into a late draft of what's known as the Budget Implementation Bill in the pandemic-shortened 2020 session. It was an initiative of the Illinois Legislative Latino Caucus and sponsored by House of State Representative Delia Ramirez. Delia Ramirez is now in the U.S. Congress. She and other advocates said providing health care, especially preventative care, to immigrant populations would be cheaper than making them dependent on emergency room visits. Now, I want to know who in her family is benefiting from this, because we know from her own website that Delia's mother crossed illegally into the United States, and then Delia was born not that long afterwards. We also know from her own website and her statements that Delia's husband is a DACA recipient, which means that his parents crossed illegally into the United States. Are they all beneficiaries of Delia's bill that she passed in the state? I'd like to know. Delia goes on to say, she says, you can pay taxes, you can do this, you can do that, you can be in this country for 25 years attempting to legalize, but you can't get this basic health care, basic ability to stay alive covered. If ever before, this pandemic has shown us how critical that is. Ramirez was quoted in the State Journal Register at the time. Ramirez pegged the program's cost at $2 million. That was in 2020, less than 3 years ago. This program was only supposed to cost $2 million. The source of the initial estimate is unclear. This is how everything happens in Springfield. The source of the initial estimate is unclear. Although J.B. Pritzker's administration said it had not prepared its own estimate before the program became law because it was a lawmaker-driven initiative. Oh, so we're just not going to peg a number when it's somebody like Delia, a Democrat, who wants to do something for her own people. Not her own people, her own constituents that are actual legal citizens. No, her own people that are non-citizens, citizens and illegal immigrants. Republicans noted at a press conference that it was not thoroughly vetted in committee before being added to the budget. Okay, so there was no vetting of this in committee before being added to the budget. The actual cost of the program far exceeded that estimate, and the program exceeded its appropriation within the first month of implementation. It was supposed to cost $2 million. Within the first month, it exceeded that cost. This is according to a closed-door presentation by the Illinois Department of Health Care and Family Services to lawmakers last month. The cost of care for the 65 and over age group was nearly $188 million between March of 2022 and February. Between March of 2022 and February, so in less than a year, $188 million. Since the program's initial passage, lawmakers have expanded it twice, lowering the age limit to 55 in 2021 and 42 a year later. The expanded program is known as the Health Benefits for Immigrant Adults. These aren't immigrant adults, they're illegal immigrants. As the expansion was to be implemented in 2021, Illinois Department of Health Care and Family Services brought in its own consultant to try to get a clear picture of what it would cost for the current fiscal year. That concludes June 30th. The actuarial firm Milliman estimated the total program cost at $222 million, but the actual cost for all three age groups was $410 million from March 2022 through February, according to the department. And now what is it projected to be? Well, it's projected to be $990 million. $990 million. For a program started by one lady as a benefit to her people, and for which there was no solid estimates done beforehand. This is how you get in debt. And now the Democrats are crying, wow, we may not be able to afford this. No kidding. Meanwhile, they talk about, there's a homeless veterans population. There's other poor people that don't get health care. There's this, there's that. $1 billion. And at the same time, the teacher unions trying to shut down a tax credit scholarship program that cost the state $75 million last year. The teacher unions trying to shut that down. At the same time, they're absolutely okay with $1 billion going to illegal immigrants for health care. They don't say a word about that. And the teacher unions don't need, they've had billions of dollars of new money too since the tax credit scholarship program passed, when they also passed the new funding formula for education. They've had billions upon billions of new money, and they have nothing to show for it. I mean, this is insanity in this state. Insanity. I hope Republicans skewer them on this. Okay, last thing that I wanted to talk about. Oh, by the way, update. I mean, Kim Foxx has decided not to run for re-election. Well, that's good news. Who's Preckwinkle and Johnson going to put up instead? We'll find out. Could be worse. Although it'd be hard to be worse than Kim Foxx, given the Jussie Smollett issue, given the fact that she doesn't enforce felony theft, given the fact that she lets criminals out all the time. Oh, speaking of which, by the way, okay, yeah, let's just do this. This weekend, 3 killed, 23 wounded. Probably because it was a cold weekend. 3 killed, 23 wounded. Let's see. Year to date in Chicago, 160 shot and killed, 589 shot and wounded. Total shots, 749. Total homicides, 172. Yep. April to date, shot and killed, 41. Shot and wounded, 163. All right. Last one. Let's talk about fentanyl. I'm going to play a clip from the Dan and Amy show that just aired this morning. I think it's really alarming, and I think people should get their head out of their you-know-what and pay attention to what your legislators are doing and how we're tackling this. So listen to this clip from the Dan and Amy show this morning.
Outreach for 30 years, as he writes, was recently providing outreach in Chicago and Evanston, and will return to Chicagoland soon, I understand. Kevin, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
So all of the drug use trends that you've experienced and you helped people who were addicted deal with couldn't prepare you for fentanyl. Why? What's the game changer here?
Game changer is, well, it is definitely the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. What's terrifying about fentanyl is it's 50 times stronger than heroin and cheaper. And it is now basically in all other street drugs. It's been sprinkled onto everything else. And this was done deliberately by the dealers, the cartels, to get people addicted. So it's highly addictive, it's highly potent, it's highly deadly. So it's the worst thing I've ever seen. And as people build a tolerance to even that, the new trend, certainly on the West Coast of the United States, is adding something called Tranq, which is a horse tranquilizer, which extends increases the potency and also helps it last longer. And so that's why we've seen a significant increase in overdoses and deaths, primarily on the West Coast of the United States.
Okay, so there you have it. Fentanyl, 50 times more deadly than heroin and cheaper. And it's in all the street drugs. This is exactly parallels what we discussed last year with our own DuPage County coroner, Jorgensen, Dr. Jorgensen. And he said the same thing. He said that it's laced on top of all sorts of other drugs. But I want to remind people what Deb Conroy, your current DuPage County chairman, did when she was a state legislator. She sponsored and voted for a bill that would decriminalize fentanyl, enough to kill 1,500 people. So where is she held to account for that type of vote? Has anybody held her to account? Has anybody talked about what she's doing? You just heard from an expert, a guy who deals with homelessness and addiction. And we all know that there's a fentanyl crisis going on in America, and it's not just in some faraway place, by the way. It's right here in DuPage County. So I just want to bring that back up because your legislators in Springfield don't care about this issue. They don't care about public safety. They don't care about kids who unwittingly get involved in dangerous drugs, and they happen to be laced with fentanyl. They absolutely don't care. Okay, thanks for joining me on this Facebook Live and this podcast as we covered a few very important issues, things that are occurring here right now in this county and in your locality. So stay with us. This is The Real Story with Jeanne Ives. Go ahead and listen to my other podcasts. You can find me on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and 560's podcast listing and elsewhere.